There were men in this city who made decisions with their mouths. Raphael Voss made them with his silence. He was 41 years old, and he had not raised his voice in 11 years. He had not needed to. The people around him understood long ago that the quieter Raphael became, the more serious the consequence. It was a language they had all learned to read, fluently, and with great care. He stood at the window of his office on the 14th floor and looked down at the city the way a man looks at something he owns. Not with pride, with familiarity. The way you look at your own hand. His organization had interests in 12 businesses, 2 ports, and a network of relationships that stretched across 3 countries. He did not call it an empire. He called it a structure. Empires fell. Structures, when properly maintained, endured. He was not a cruel man. That was the thing people misunderstood. Cruelty was noise. Cruelty drew attention, created enemies, wasted energy. Raphael preferred precision, the right pressure, applied to the right place, at the right time. He had no wife, no children, no attachment that could be used against him. That was not an accident. He turned from the window. His day was scheduled down to the quarter hour. He picked up his phone and began. Wednesday moved the way Wednesdays always did. 8 o'clock, a call with his logistics director about a delayed shipment through Marseille. 9:15, a brief meeting with his accountant, a small, careful man named Brandt who communicated primarily through spreadsheets and subtle throat clearing. 11, a site visit to a warehouse on the south end that was being converted into a storage facility for one of his legitimate holdings. Lunch was taken alone, at a corner table in a restaurant he part-owned, where the staff knew not to hover. He ate, he read, he made 2 calls. The afternoon was paperwork and one conversation with a city official whose cooperation Raphael had maintained for 6 years through a combination of generosity and quiet awareness of certain facts the official preferred kept private. By 4 o'clock, everything had proceeded exactly as expected. Raphael did not find this dull. Other men craved surprise, the unpredictable deal, the sudden opening. He had learned that surprise was usually just a failure of preparation. The more thoroughly you understood your environment, the more it behaved. He left the office at 4:45. His driver, a steady man named Tomas, had the car waiting. They took the usual route, past the market on Delancey, past the park, and that was where it happened. Something small, barely anything. The park was just a park. Raphael passed it most evenings. A square block of green pressed between 2 older buildings, with a fountain that only ran in summer and a scattering of wooden benches. He never stopped there. It was simply part of the route. Today, Tomas caught a red light directly in front of the entrance. Raphael looked up from his phone. There was a child sitting alone on the bench closest to the gate. A small boy, 5, maybe 6, with dark, close-cropped hair and a serious expression that seemed too old for his face. He wasn't crying, wasn't playing, wasn't looking at anything in particular. He was just sitting very still, with his hands folded in his lap, watching the street. Raphael looked back at his phone. The light stayed red. He looked up again. The boy hadn't moved, but something about the stillness was unusual. Not distressed, not lost, just composed. Like a child who had learned early that stillness was safer than motion. Raphael knew that posture. He had worn it himself once, a long time ago. The light changed. Tomas pulled forward. Raphael set his phone face down on the seat, something he almost never did mid-route, and looked back through the rear window. The boy was still sitting exactly as before. He didn't mention it to anyone. That evening, back in the apartment, a spare, ordered space that reflected its owner precisely, he poured a glass of water and stood at the kitchen counter and tried to identify what was bothering him. Not bothering. That was the wrong word. Bothering implied discomfort. This was more like a snag, a small catch on something, the way a thread pulls when a hem is coming loose. The boy had been alone. That was probably it. A child that age, on a bench by himself, in a city that did not look after its unattended things. It was a practical concern, a reasonable one. He was not a sentimental man. He had been around children before, the children of associates, at gatherings he attended when required. They were fine. He was neither drawn to them nor particularly bothered by them. They existed in a category of things he had simply elected not to have. He finished the water, set the glass down with precision. The boy had been composed in a way that didn't fit his age. That was what had caught him. Not sentiment. Professional instinct. The same instinct that flagged anomalies in shipping routes and inconsistencies in financial reports. The boy had been anomalous. He filed it, moved on. Slept without difficulty, the way he always did. He didn't go back the next day. But on Friday, he told Tomas to take the park route again. He framed it as a preference, slightly better traffic in the afternoon, and Tomas, who asked very few questions, simply adjusted. The boy was there again. Same bench, same stillness. Different clothes, a gray shirt this time, neatly pressed, but the same hands folded in the lap. The same composed, quiet watching of the street. This time, as the car slowed at the light, the boy looked up, and he looked directly at Raphael. Not at the car, at Raphael. Through the tinted window, which should have made him invisible. Children stared at cars sometimes, at their own reflections, or at movement. This was not that. The boy was looking at a specific point inside the vehicle, at him. Raphael did not move. For approximately 4 seconds, the boy held that gaze. There was nothing aggressive in it, nothing afraid. It was attentive, like the gaze of someone who was trying to understand something, measuring, without the awareness to know that's what they were doing. Then the light changed, and as the car pulled away, the boy did something small. He nodded. Once, slow and deliberate, like a greeting. Raphael faced forward, said nothing. His jaw was very slightly tight. He thought about it for the rest of the drive. There was something in the face that he couldn't place, something that activated the same low, wordless recognition you felt when a name was on the tip of your tongue. Not memory exactly, more like the shape that memory left behind when the detail was gone. The jaw, maybe. The eyes, dark, wide-set, with a heaviness to them that didn't belong on a child. The way the boy held his shoulders, square, still. Raphael let the thoughts run without grabbing at them. That was how he'd always worked. Give information space, and eventually it arranged itself. By the time they reached the apartment building, he had not identified what bothered him. He went upstairs, made calls, worked until 10, ate a late dinner of something simple that his housekeeper had left covered in the refrigerator. He did not sleep as easily as usual. At some point, 2 in the morning, perhaps 3, he woke briefly and lay looking at the ceiling. His mind surfaced the image without invitation. The boy on the bench, hands folded, watching with that old young gaze. The nod. Raphael sat up. He hadn't been seen like that in a long time. Not clearly. Not without the armor of context. Without his name and his reputation arriving before him. The boy had just looked at him and seen something. She had seen the car. Elena Vasquez stood at the edge of the park, near the older elm tree where she always waited while Mateo sat on his bench. It was their arrangement. He liked to sit alone for a while after school, and she respected that. She kept him in eyeline. That was enough. She saw the dark car slow at the light. She saw the window, tinted, impenetrable, and she felt, before she could explain it, a pull of attention in that direction. The same pull she'd been outrunning for 6 years. Then she saw Mateo look up. She went very still. She watched her son hold that gaze toward the car, toward the window that should have shown him nothing, and she watched him nod. Her stomach dropped. She was across the park in 20 steps, moving with the controlled speed of someone who could not afford to appear panicked. She reached the bench and sat beside him and put her hand over his folded ones. "Time to go home," she said. Mateo looked at her. He was 5 years old, and already he had her gift for reading the temperature of a room, a gift she wished she hadn't passed on. "Who was in the car?" he asked. "No one," she said. She said it too quickly. She knew that even as the word left her mouth. Mateo knew it too. She couldn't sleep that night. She lay on her back and stared at the ceiling of the small apartment she'd rented under a name that was technically hers, but that she'd stopped thinking of as herself years ago. Elena Vasquez. She'd been Elena Vasquez since a few months before Mateo was born. Before that, she had been someone else, someone younger and more certain and far less careful. She had met Raphael Voss at 23, not the version of him that the city knew. She had met him before the 14th floor office, before the structure was quite as structured. She had met him when he was still a man who occasionally laughed. It had not been a long relationship. 3 months. Long enough. She hadn't known when she left that she was carrying anything with her. By the time she did know, 6 weeks later, a small pink line on a test she'd taken 3 times, she had already understood enough about his world to understand one thing clearly. A child connected to Raphael Voss was a child connected to everything that came with him. She had made her decision alone. She had never doubted it. But she had always known, with the quiet, dull certainty of a thing you refuse to look at directly, that the world was not actually very large, and that eventually it folded. The car had been black, the same model he'd always used. She pressed her hands flat against the mattress. Raphael did not return to the park that weekend. He had work that required his full attention, a dispute between 2 of his partners in the port arrangement that had escalated faster than anticipated and required his personal involvement to contain. He handled it. Saturday and most of Sunday was consumed by it. He did not think about the boy. Or rather, he thought about the boy in the background, the way you're aware of a sound that hasn't quite become loud enough to identify. On Sunday evening, when everything had settled, and he sat in his office with the city dark below him, he noticed he was thinking about it again. The nod. He turned the image over carefully. He was not a man given to intuition in the romantic sense, but he was profoundly attuned to pattern, had built his entire career on the ability to see configurations before they fully formed. And the feeling the boy produced was a pattern feeling. Not random, not sentiment, recognition. He pulled out his phone. He typed a name into a search he rarely used, a secure channel his intelligence contact maintained. Not the boy's name. He didn't have that. He typed, Park on Delancey, regular bench, small boy, 5 or 6, dark hair, alone, weekdays. He stared at what he'd typed. Then he sent it. Monday came and he was himself again, scheduled, precise, fully present in every meeting. But at 11:40, between calls, he found himself standing at the window doing the arithmetic he'd been avoiding. The boy was 5, maybe just turned 6. He didn't know what that meant yet. He wasn't willing to draw the line fully. But he was a man who dealt in facts. And the fact was, 6 years ago, his life had contained a specific person, briefly and intensely, and then she had disappeared. Not dramatically, not with conflict, just quietly and completely. And he had allowed it because he had decided at the time that the complications of her staying outweighed whatever the alternative was. He had never looked for her. He had told himself it was mutual, a clean ending. He pressed his thumb against the window glass. The city went about its business 14 floors below. He had a face that was hard and controlled and gave nothing away, and he used it now to contain what was moving behind it. His phone buzzed, his intelligence contact, a message. Child's name, Mateo Vasquez, age 5, attends Greenfield Elementary nearby. Mother, Elena Vasquez, moved to the neighborhood 14 months ago. Prior address, Harlow Street, across the city. Prior to that, no local record. Raphael read it twice. Elena, he didn't act immediately. He sat with the name the way he sat with everything. Gave it room. Let it settle. Tested its weight. Elena, she had been quiet and sharp and warm in a combination he hadn't encountered before or since. She had asked very little of him. She had understood, without being told, the kind of life he moved through, and she had neither romanticized it nor feared it more than was reasonable. He had found that rare. He had found her rare. And when she stopped returning calls, when she simply was not there anymore, he had absorbed the loss with the same control he applied to everything else. He had not been fine, exactly, but he had been functional. That was what he required of himself. Now he sat with the fact that she had been 14 months away from him, in the same city, with a child. He pulled up the contact file again. Mateo Vasquez. Born, he did the arithmetic, approximately 9 months after Elena had last been in his life. He set the phone down, picked it up again. There was a photograph attached to the file, a school registration image, small and slightly blurred. A boy with dark, close-cropped hair and wide-set eyes and a composed, serious expression, the same expression he had worn on that bench. Raphael looked at it for a long time. He saw them on Tuesday. Not at the park. He hadn't planned it, or perhaps he had, in the way that decisions make themselves before the conscious mind admits to them. He had asked Tomas to take a different route home, one that happened to pass Greenfield Elementary at 3:15. He was not prepared for what happened. The boy came through the school gate in a cluster of children, then separated from them immediately, the way children do when they have learned to travel quietly. He adjusted his backpack, looked up, and Elena was there. She was standing at the corner, and she was exactly as he remembered. Same controlled stillness, same careful eyes, except that she looked older in the way that difficulty makes people older. She had a coffee cup in one hand. She was watching her son with the concentrated attention of someone for whom that small, moving shape was the entire world. The boy reached her. She bent and said something. He said something back. She looked up. Her eyes swept the street the way they always had, alert, systematic, and they landed on the car. She went very still. Raphael watched her process it, the model, the plates, the particular way it idled. She knew. He could see it in her face, the recognition, and behind it, the calculation, and behind that, the fear. She took Mateo's hand and turned. She walked home fast, not running. Running attracted attention, and she had spent 6 years cultivating the appearance of a woman who had nothing to hide, nothing to fear, nothing unusual about her life at all. Mateo kept pace beside her. He could feel it when she was worried. He always could. And he was quiet, which meant he was processing. Inside, with the door locked and the chain on, she sat him down at the kitchen table with a snack and made sure he was settled. Then she went to the bathroom and ran the tap and stood over the sink and breathed. She had known this was a possibility. She had known it abstractly. The way you know a bridge might be slippery. In a category of risks you acknowledge but don't dwell on because dwelling doesn't help. But knowing abstractly and having his car outside her son's school were two very different things. He hadn't approached them. That was something. Raphael Voss, if he had wanted to confront her, would not have done it from a passing car. That was not how he operated, which meant he was watching, which meant he was not yet certain, which meant she had some time, she didn't know how much, to decide what she was going to do. She turned off the tap, dried her hands. She looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment. She had no good options. She had only degrees of difficult. He called Marco that evening, not for surveillance. He had enough. For something else. "I need everything on Elena Vasquez," he said. "Current, her work, her routines, who she knows here, quietly, nothing that would make her aware." Marco said he'd have it by morning. Then Raphael said, "And pull what you can from 6 years ago, before she left." A pause. "How far back?" "As far as it goes." He hung up. He stood in the kitchen of his apartment and did something he almost never did. Poured 2 fingers of whiskey and drank it standing up, alone, looking at nothing. The questions were multiplying in an orderly way. He didn't try to answer them yet. He just let them exist. If Mateo was his, and the mathematics and the face and the expression all pointed in one direction, then Elena had made a decision 6 years ago to raise a child alone, rather than bring him into Raphael's world. He could understand that. He could understand it completely. That was, perhaps, the most complicated part. He could not find anger in the place where he was trying to find anger because the reasoning was sound. She had looked at his life clearly and made a rational choice. But the boy had nodded at him through a tinted window. Something about that kept arriving. He poured the second glass. Marco's file arrived Thursday morning. Elena Vasquez worked 4 days a week at a small architectural firm near the waterfront. Junior draftswoman, the kind of precise, detail-oriented work that suited her. She walked Mateo to school each morning, collected him each afternoon. They ate together. She read to him. On Saturdays, they went to a market 3 blocks from their apartment. She had no partner, no close friends who appeared more than occasionally. She was contained and careful and had built a life that was entirely constructed around one axis, her son. Raphael read the file the way he had read the other file, looking for the shape of the person inside the facts. He found what he expected. She had not dated anyone, had not taken extended trips, changed jobs more than once, or done anything that suggested she was running, rather than simply settled. She had built something real, small but real. Mateo was enrolled in school under a name that was hers, but not Raphael's. There was no father listed on the registration. She had not accessed anything connected to him in 6 years. No attempts at contact, no financial requests, no messages through intermediaries. She had asked for nothing. She had built everything from what she had. Raphael set the file down. Something in his chest that had been tightly held for a very long time was making a sound he didn't have a word for. He started watching differently. Not with his intelligence contacts. He had enough information. He started watching the way he used to watch things before he had infrastructure to do it for him. Directly. Personally. On Saturday, from a distance and without Tomas, he went to the market. He saw them from across the row of vegetable stalls. Mateo was walking slightly ahead of Elena, the way children do when they've been given the dignity of choosing, stopping at a stall that had small clay figurines arranged on a cloth. He picked one up and turned it over in his hands with the focused attention of a child who was genuinely interested, not performing interest. Elena stood a step back and watched him. Her face, when she didn't know anyone was looking, it was different, not guarded, open in a way he had seen years ago and had almost forgotten. She was looking at her son with something so complete and uncomplicated that it made the market noise seem far away. Raphael stood very still. This was what he had no equivalent for in his own life. Not the money, not the structure. This. A person looking at another person with that specific, total quality of love. He had been at the center of a great many things. He had never been looked at like that. He turned and walked back the way he came. His hands were not entirely steady. She found the envelope on Monday morning. It was slipped under her apartment door. No name on the front, just a single folded sheet inside. She picked it up in the hallway, her keys still in her hand, Mateo still eating breakfast inside. She unfolded it. 3 words, "We should talk." No name, no number, no threat. Just those words in handwriting she hadn't seen in 6 years, but recognized immediately. She stood in the hallway for a long moment. Then she went back inside, made sure Mateo had his backpack, walked him to school, came home, sat at the kitchen table with the note in front of her. She had been preparing for this moment for 5 years and 8 months, and now that it was here, every prepared version of it felt useless. The arguments she'd rehearsed, the explanations, the things she'd decided she would and wouldn't say. What she felt, underneath all of it, was not fear. It was exhaustion. She was tired of carrying it alone. She was tired of the weight of a truth that took both hands to hold. She took out her phone, typed a single message to the number she had kept, against all better judgment, in a locked note on her phone for 6 years. Never deleted. Never used. Tomorrow. The cafe on Marin Street. 10 o'clock. She sent it before she could take it back. He was there at 9:45. He sat at a corner table with a coffee he didn't drink and waited. He had not rehearsed what he would say. He was not sure, for perhaps the first time in his adult life, that he knew what the correct thing to do was. Elena came in at 10 exactly. She looked at him the way you look at something you've been bracing for. Not the look of someone who was frightened, the look of someone who had decided they were going to handle this no matter what it cost them. She sat down. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "He's yours," she said. Just that. No preamble. No softening. Raphael looked at her. "I know," he said quietly. Something moved across her face. Surprise, maybe, or relief that they didn't have to circle it. "I need you to understand why," she started. "I do understand," he said. She stopped. "You looked at my life," he said, "and you made the safest choice for him. I know what my life is, Elena. I've always known what it is." He paused. "I'm not here to be angry. I'm here because I sat outside his school and I watched him walk out the gate, and I need to know him." Elena's hands, flat on the table, tightened slightly. "He's 5, she said. "I know. He's mine. I know that too." She didn't agree to anything that day. She listened. She asked questions, careful, precise questions that reminded him why he had once found her so striking. She wanted to know what he intended, what he expected, what he thought any of this could look like, given who he was and how he lived. He answered honestly. He told her he didn't know. He told her he had spent the last 2 weeks dismantling everything he thought he understood about what he needed and what mattered, and that he had arrived at this table with no plan. Just the truth that a 5-year-old boy had looked at him through a car window and nodded, and that something in him had cracked open. Elena listened to all of it. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then, he asks about his father. Raphael said nothing. Not often. He doesn't push, but he asks. He wants to know if his father knows about him. I tell him I don't know. She looked at the table. I hate that answer. I've always hated it. I didn't know, Raphael said. I know you didn't. She looked up. That doesn't fix anything. No, he said. It doesn't. They sat with that. Outside, the cafe went on around them. Ordinary noise, ordinary morning. Two people at a corner table holding something enormous between them, neither of them breaking. 3 weeks later, Raphael met his son. Elena arranged it carefully, on her terms, in her time, at the small park near their apartment. She told Matteo only that there was someone who wanted to meet him, someone important. Matteo had looked at her with those wide, serious eyes and said, "Is it my dad?" She hadn't answered right away. "Yes," she finally said. He had nodded. Once? The same way he had nodded at the car. Raphael arrived alone. No Tomas. No suit. Just plain clothes, the kind of ordinary he almost never wore. He sat on the bench nearest the gate and waited. When they came through the entrance, Matteo walked slightly ahead of his mother, the way he always did. He stopped in front of Raphael and looked at him. Raphael looked back. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Matteo said, "You have the same eyes as me." Raphael's throat tightened in a way no boardroom, no crisis, no loss had ever produced. "I think I do," he said. Matteo considered this with the gravity of someone making an important assessment. Then he sat down on the bench beside Raphael, not far away, right next to him. Elena stood a few steps back, watching. Raphael did not rebuild his life overnight. He did not abandon what he had built. That would take time and thought, and choices he wasn't yet ready to name. But he sat on that bench, in the ordinary afternoon light, with his son beside him. And for the first time in 11 years, he was not calculating the next move. He was just there,